correct term is accreditation. Well, it kind of, the terminology might be confusing, but the work requires to use specific terminology, because I will explain, throughout my presentation that it might matter when you are defending your program if things goes wrong. First of all, I would like to explain a little bit about ANSI, because we are kind of an interesting organization. ANSI type of organization is in every single country. Is usually a governmental organization or semi-governmental organization. In the United States, private sector really didn't want the government handle their own business. So when we were established in 1918, we were established as a private organization, non-profit 501c3. But our founders, among some of the industry associations, also that time Department of War, now Department of Defense and Department of Commerce. So we are managed by a group of private and government organizations. And also in every other country, usually there are two types of organizations handles both standardization activities and also conformity assessment, accreditation activities. In the United States, they're all handled by ANSI, although by different units. So the activities I'm going to talking about handled by our accreditation services. This is our general accreditation portfolio. We basically assure any type of standard and standard developer organization as an American national standard. And also we accredit certain services, products based on, international standards or American national standards. And also we comply with the ISO IC 1711, which is an international standard for accreditation agencies. So I'm going to be talking about now why it matters to look at what happens during a training program and afterwards, especially in high consequence environments. Some industries may call it high consequence environment. Some industries, they call it high stake training programs. Basically, that definition means that if learners do not learn what they're supposed to learn, there can be some consequences. It can be, true in the oil and gas, nuclear, any type of safety-related program, medical, airlines, transportation. So basically, the three major component of those high-stake training programs and high consequence environments are, first, there should be a risk. If learners do not, learn what they're supposed to learn, then they can produce risk. And also, they need to comply with certain safety and regulatory and compliance standards. And third is that that particular industry might be so complex and require technical expertise that you need to assure those people who are doing what they are doing knows what they are doing. So when you are operating a training program, when you're running a training program and you're trying to train people in those industries, then that concept comes up, educational defensibility. What educational defensibility? This is an educational concept, but as I will talk on my next slide, it becomes very handy when things goes wrong and when you need to defend yourself. Basically, educational defensibility has two major components. One is the content validity. For example, when we are talking about, when Rick talked about the ANSI standard for nuclear industry 3.5, that can be labeled as an industry accepted practice. So it means that the content there is a valid content. It means that all other industry partners came together and they agree that that particular content should be taught or should be learned. So content validity basically assures that, you are teaching the right content based on the expectation of the industry partners. Another important topic, mostly ignored, those kind of training programs, are the assessment, validity, and reliability. Basically, the short definition is the scoring of a learner assessment must be based on a passing standard established through a criterion reference method. It means that when someone says, I passed an exam, like, in our college years, we say, okay, passing score is 70. Well, what does it mean? Usually in colleges and many training programs, passing scores or cut scores calculated based on a curve. So that's a norm reference. Basically, your achievement during a training program or an educational program depends on the achievement of the other guy sitting next to you. So imagine that if he's lazy, and sometimes those classes, like if there is a lazy class, and we all went and look for those kind of classes because then the passing score will be lower than the smart guys classes, right? So that is very wrong educational model, especially if you are providing a training, a high consequence environment. So then it should be a criteria that how, what type of concepts need to be learned, and then depending on your the particular area's learning outcomes, then you should define what should be the passing score or a cut score. In some industries, in high consequence environments, passing score must be maybe just 100. You have to learn everything. You cannot just left anything alone. Imagine now we all gonna go back our homes and we're gonna fly with an airplane. Imagine the pilot passing his pilot test. I don't know if there's any test like that, but let's just assume that, with a 70. So it means that he only learned 70% of the content. 30% of the content he didn't learn. Or the training program, pilot school, did not enforce him to learn. Or when you are, going to a, God forbid, some sort of an operation, surgeon who complete the medical school with a minimum passing score of 70. So imagine your surgeon does not know the 30% of the content that while he's operating you. So some areas might be lower passing score or lower assessment percentage, but that should be determined based on a criterion referenced method for each industry. So when these two things got together, what happens is that are the assessment results and more generally the training program is defensible in the court of law. When I'm going to give you an example. I'm not going to talk about any company name, but there have been some situation in oil and gas several years ago. Actually, there were a couple of situations like that, so I'm just going to talk about generally. When there is an incident in an oil platform, there was an incident on an oil platform, and then the big accident happened, and after a few months or few years, when they're trying to investigate the cause of the accident, they found out that it was not a machine error. In most litigation cases, when you are in the table with the lawyers and stuff, they're gonna look two causes. Is it a machine error or is it a human error? If it is not machine error, then if it is a human error, then they're gonna look again two things. Was it a negligence issue or was it a competence issue? Meaning, if the person did sleep on the job or the person really did not know what he's doing. Let's say if it is not a negligence issue, the person was really careful. Then if it is a competence issue, the first thing that the court or lawyers or whomever the experts are gonna look is, was that person trained properly? So when that question comes up, then those two things, content validity and assessment validity and reliability, must be there, because in litigation cases, those validity and reliability, and you can even Google, in a simple term, that many the court cases in the United States use that as a scientific evidence. So in that example I just mentioned on that oil platform incident, the company could not provide that particular technician or technicians that caused that accident did not have a proper training, and therefore they had to pay a couple $2 billion more in terms of the repairman cost. So of course, this is the worst case scenario, but what happens is that when you are operating a training program, or when you are running a training program, or when you are sending your employees to a training program in a high consequence environment, one of the things that you always may need to consider is, first of all, how can I assure those people learn what they're supposed to learn? If they don't, then what happens? Of course, if they don't, many things may happen, but let's assume you want that accident, not happening. That will assure, actually, first of all, your boss, you will not be fired, hopefully, and then it will assure the public, because those high consequence environments are quite dependent on the operational continuity, right? Let's say you are running a power plant or a nuclear power station, or even any type of safety-related program. If there is an accident, then operation stops, and that basically that organization loses confidence in the eye of public, or even can cause other bigger problems that connecting the other industries. So that type of assurance may get the buy-in from the public, and even sometimes that we have seen in certain industries, if the company is a publicly traded company, it can even affect their stock exchange price. There is a study now which Saudi Aramco now trying to put the 5% IPO. We are actually working on that with the organization, that what could be the results of if Saudi Aramco, that first time coming out to the IPO, and how they can assure that their stock exchange prices will not be lowered if, let's say, there is an accident, and how they can assure that their personnel, well-trained, will not be the cause of that future accidents. So in those type of situations, assuring a training program, a quality assuring a training program, becomes quite critical. So how do they do that? I'm just going to mention about that American National Standard, ANSI ASTM 82659, the basic components. Basically, one of the requirements are that the training provider should have a proper management systems, similar to ISO 9000 type of management system requirements. And also, they should have a certain methodology when they are developing their training program. It's kind of a famed method now, ADDIE methodology. When you are trying to create a program, you have to have need analysis, design, development, implementation, evaluation of the training. And also you have to have an oversight group to determine whether or not the content is valid or not. Because when you are trying to create a training program, sometimes in many industries, they just assign one content developer, and usually that content developer might be less experienced person than the rest of the experts there. And he or she or a group of content developers create the content. So that usually causes the problem, because that that might be just the effort of a couple of people's activity, but not a consensus of what industry is actually requiring that individuals need to learn. So therefore, an expert group that approving content will be always useful, even if that content is general accepted practice. And also, as I mentioned, that learning outcomes should be measurable based on criterion reference testing, because at the end, you want to know that how your learning outcomes are aligned with your content, and also what type of outcomes that expected by the industry. And also the other requirements about how those training programs valid. Sometimes, like in oil and gas, there is a particular training on hydrogen sulfide, and they are using an ANSI standard in all over the world, actually. ANSI ACC Z390 hydrogen sulfide training programs that being required to be trained every year. Doesn't matter once you're trained, they don't rely on your training, so they want to repeat that training every year. One of the examples of those kind of high-stake training programs that requiring quality assurance and also using simulations is U.S. Army Combat Readiness and Safety Center. Those programs that offered by the U.S. Army, it's their base in Fort Rucker, Alabama, and that's the Army Aviation Training School there. And these programs that aviation safety, CP12 safety professional, explosive safety, and ground safety, they're actually interesting because U.S. Army does not need any type of quality assurance from anyone. They just operate their own. But the thing is that when or if there is an accident happens, then if they want to assure that that accident was not because of some reason that they could prevent, and they even dare to go to a civilian organization like, ANSI, and then assure their training programs meet certain criteria and standards. And interestingly, all of those programs that they run, they use some sort of simulators or simulation models, and based on the statistics that they even on their website publishes, that assurance of the training programs reduces the incident levels. And similar example, like when the food safety programs requires accreditation on certain states. I can give an example on California. There's been a first law in 2011 in California that all food handlers must go through a 2-hour, training, and that training must be an, accredited training. Then when California Department of Public Health made a study before 2011, after 2011, after 2011, and they took like a 3-year time period before and after, they compared the citations being issued by the Department of Health inspectors, and the citations were 90% down. So it means that that type of assurance or any type of training program actually reduces the incident level. And in this case, in food safety, basically, when you go to a restaurant in California, good news is you will get less sick. So, of course, in other cases, in more serious cases, in higher stakes, in oil, gas, nuclear, you may live. You don't have to die because of someone doesn't know what he's doing or someone did not learn what they're supposed to learn. So that's pretty much it, what I need to say. Thank you.